reviews, and whether you have a trust or not, I think this information will be helpful. And we're going to talk about different aspects of a trust, why you need a trust review, and when it's best time to schedule a trust review. At the very end, we'll talk about questions and answers. So during the presentation, at the bottom of your screen, you should see an option for Q&A, and you can type in your questions at that point during the presentations, and we'll take questions and answers at the very end. So with that, let me get started. And so who needs a trust review? Well, if you have a trust or any estate plan that's older than 3 years, or if you haven't been to an law office in the last 2 or 3 years, it's time, in my opinion, to come in for a free review. The way we draft trust documents is different than most firms. And when we do a trust review, it's a complimentary meeting. So there's no charge for that meeting. If there's changes that are going to be made, then we'll quote you a fee at the end. So it's always important to use that option for that free meeting, just to review your documents. Some people don't know that it's time for a review. So things that you start looking for: has your health changed? And what about your lineups? So the lineups that you've named to make trust decisions, your trustees, or the persons in your healthcare power of attorney document, the patient advocates, have their health changed? Are they still sharp? Are they still going to be able to make good decisions on your behalf? If their health has declined or they passed away, now's a good time to come in and have your documents reviewed and see if you need additional lineups. So when we set up trust documents, we always have backups. So just because someone's passed away or they can't act doesn't mean you need changes, but it's a good chance at that point in time to review your list and see if the other people on your list are still appropriate, or if you think you want to make changes at that point in time. So anytime you see health changes for either you or the people that you've named to make financial decisions or healthcare decisions, at that point, that's a good indication it's time to come in for a trust review at that point. Another option to look at is if the people you've named in your estate plan, if they either die or become incompetent. So you may have named individuals 10 years ago, and they may have passed away or they became incompetent. Maybe they've got some dementia. That's a good time to come in and review your documents as well. Another thing to look at too is whether or not your wishes have changed since you've updated your documents. Maybe you've named someone years ago and you thought, you know what, they'd make great decisions for me. But over the years, you've seen how they've handled their life, and maybe you thought, maybe I want to make someone else in charge of my medical or my financial decisions. So anytime you see your wishes change, that's a good time to come in and update your documents as well. It may be a case too that you've given beneficiaries different assets, and now you want to change that for some reason. Maybe you see that someone has more needs, or maybe you decide you want to give some of your assets to new beneficiaries. That's the time to come in and have your documents reviewed as well. The other thing to think about as well is if you don't know how your documents work together, maybe it's been 5 years and you know, yeah, I've got 2 different trusts. I've got this pantry trust and I've got this protection trust. I'm not sure how that really works anymore. You've got some recollection, there's a 5-year clock, but you need a refresher. That's a good time to say, okay, I need another trust review. I want to find out how my documents work. And also I want to start looking at, is everything set up the way I want? Even though it's been 2 or 3 years or 5 years, it's a good time to come in if you can't remember the details on how your documents work together at that point. So how do you prepare for a trust review? So as a client, we always like to have the client fill out that personal information form. That includes your name, your addresses, names and addresses of the kids. Some people have a reluctance to say, yeah, nothing's changed. I filled that out 3 years ago, nothing's changed. But if I press some clients and then I find out, yeah, one of my kids got married or they got a divorce and their name has changed. So it's always important to fill out that information form. It's kind of like going to the doctor. I hate filling out those forms. Yeah, I've got the same insurance. I don't have any more allergies, but it is important to fill out that personal personal information form, even though you think it didn't change, sometimes that'll jog your memory and find out, yeah, the kids moved, or there's something else that's going on as well. Same thing with your address or phone number or email. So over the years, people have changed their phone numbers or email addresses, and that information is asked on that form. So I encourage you to fill that information form out. It'll help us a lot. Another way to prepare for the trust review is to complete a financial information packet. That will list all your assets. We want to find out, did you sell any assets? Did you close any accounts? Did you open new accounts? Did you buy property? Do you sell any real estate? So the more information we have about your financial information packet, the better we can guide you as to what may need to be updated. So it may have been 5 years, and you may think nothing has changed, and sometimes that's the case, but having that form filled out will help us as well to kind of figure out what needs to be done in terms of maybe updating your trust documents or getting your trust funded again. Another way to prepare for your trust review is to find out if you open new accounts, how are those accounts held? Sometimes people will open a new account and they'll put it in their name, or they'll put it in the name of the trust, and they may forget they have 2 different trusts, so we want to see those account statements. So if you open new accounts, that's one thing we're going to ask. All right, how is that held, and can we verify that with statements? So if you have any new accounts, it's always helpful to bring in those statements so we can look at those accounts and see how they're held. It also helps us to identify what type of account those are. So some people will tell me, I've got a new account, it's a retirement account, and I'm going to press them to say, is it an IRA or a 401k, or is it just money that you use for after-tax money? You've got that set aside as this is your retirement money, but you've already paid taxes on it. So the type of account is going to dictate how we're going to fund that as well. So that's why we like to see the statements. Other questions we ask at the trust review is if you ever sold any of your real estate. And if you did, what did you do with the proceeds? So if you have 2 trusts, and you have a protection trust, and you sold the real estate, the ideal situation is you get a check payable to you as trustee of your protection trust, and you want to put that money into a protection trust account. So we always want to keep that 5-year clock going. So it's my recommendation, before you sell the real estate, give us a call, make sure we know what your plans are, and you get good advice on how to protect those assets when they turn from real estate to cash. Same thing if you buy new real estate, you buy new property someplace, whether it's Michigan or Iowa State, we want to talk to you before you buy that property. There's different ways to protect that, and we want to make sure that you have good advice, and it's easier to get ahead of the game knowing that I'm going to buy property and I've got some ideas, how I'm going to buy it, where the money is going to come from. Is it going to come from one of my trusts? Did it come from an inheritance that you just received? So when we find out you're going to buy new property, that's a good time for a trust review. Even if you don't feel that you need a full trust review for an hour and a half long, you just have some questions, at least call and schedule that 30-minute phone call as well. So at the trust review, we'll go through your list of your trustees and your patient advocates that you've named in your documents. So we kind of refresh your memory, what you set up 3 years ago, 5 years ago, how long it was. So we go through the documents and identify those individuals' names for you and just verify that those are still people you want in place. We talk about the health concerns you may have of any of the grantors. Those are people that create the trust or your successor trustees, and find out if those are still good individuals that can still make decisions on your behalf at that point in time. Sometimes we see that the documents are old. I've had clients come in with documents that are 10 years old, and they haven't been for a trust review since they set them up. So we start looking at how the law has changed and how we do things differently. So when we start looking at your documents during a trust review, that's one of the things that we're going to look at from a legal standpoint, is how the law has changed and how does it affect your trust. It may be that there's no change in your trust documents, but at least have that review to make sure that nothing needs to be updated in your trust documents. If you have a very old trust, I'm going to say 10, 12 years old, it may not have separate share trust language in there for your beneficiaries. Your healthcare power of attorney document may not have the mental health powers in there because the laws changed. So if your documents are that old, we're going to recommend a change, and we'll explain the reasons why the change should be made and give you a quote if you do want to go forward with that. Other things we cover at the trust review, we talk about do your documents have digital assets? So about 5 years ago, the laws changed and you can put digital asset powers in your trust documents. Some people it's extremely important, other people it's not important. So people that have accounts online, I had one client that had a lot of photographs stored online for a business. It was very important that she had those powers in her trust documents. So we had to update her trust documents because they were old to add those powers for the digital assets. Not everyone needs that, but it's something that you ought to have a review for to see if that should be something that we should update as well. Also, if your documents are more than 3 or 4 years old and you've got a protection trust, we're going to recommend that we draft a line of credit, and we can go in that more details during your trust review, but think of it as a loan from your protection trust to you. So if you ever need to take money out of the protection trust, that's a good way to do that. And during the trust review, we'll talk about that in more detail. Don't think of that line of credit as I'm going to the bank and I'm applying for a line of credit. It's just borrowing money from one pocket and you're going to put it in your other pocket. So if you have a protection trust and it's more than 3 or 4 years old, make sure you schedule an appointment. We can talk about in more detail as well. Other things we talk at the trust review is about your lineup. Make sure that the people that you've named for healthcare and financial decisions are still the same people you want today. We also talk about your distribution plan in your trust review. Has that changed over time? I've got clients, they've disinherited kids years ago, but now they want to add the kids back in because the kids are coming around, they've changed, and they want to give those assets to the kids, or vice versa. So anytime you want to start thinking about making a distribution change, that's the time to come in for a trust review as well. Also, if you have a trust that's more than 10 years old, you may not have a protection trust. We've been doing protection trusts for at least 10 years, 10, 11 years. But if your trusts are that old and you don't have one, or maybe you set up a trust, a pantry trust maybe 5 years ago and didn't need a protection trust, well, maybe you need one now, and we can talk about the benefits of that at that point in time as well. The other thing at the trust review, we talk about your assets. Is it fully funded? So did you open new accounts? Did you move things around? So we want to make sure that if you have a trust that is still fully funded. We'll talk about that as well. All right, at this point, we can take questions, and if you look at the bottom of your screen, if you haven't done so already, there's a button that says Q&A. So why don't you take a minute at this point in time and type in your questions, and I'll give you a couple other pointers. So the trust review is scheduled at our offices. We have an office in Portage, Norton Shores, and in Holland, Grand Rapids. And we can do these in person if you like. We can do them a Zoom meeting or by phone. And those trust reviews are no cost for you. At the end of the meeting, takes an hour and a half or so, maybe 2 hours, depends on how many questions you have. If there's any changes are needed at that point in time, then we'll quote you a fee. But the meeting is at no cost for you. But we do make recommendations based upon what we learn at that meeting. And then you get an itemized statement based upon what we recommend based upon the information provided us at that meeting.
We have some good questions,
Okay.
Jim. So one of them is, if someone is refinancing their house, should the house be taken out of the protection trust and put back in, or refinance in the same name as the trust?
I would first find out, number one, I would schedule a phone appointment about that. The short answer is we prefer to avoid taking it out, but we can if we have to. So as a general rule, if we take it out, we have that line of credit that I talked about, that'll help you from avoiding restarting the 5-year clock. If you take it out without doing anything else and put it back in, then you're going to restart the 5-year clock. So it's important to have that phone call with an attorney and talk about your situation specifically. But we can set up that line of credit as an option. And if we have to, we can take it out and note it on the line of credit. And then when you put it back in, you repaid it back. So make sure you have a phone appointment before you take it out of that trust, because if it's not done properly, there's always a risk of restarting your 5-year clock.
And so would that be a call with an attorney like you, or is that with the funding department?
That would be a call with an attorney. So depends on which office you want to go to. You can have a phone appointment. I handle the trust reviews in Grand Rapids. Greg Van Duzen goes to our Portage office and to our Howland office, and Bill Bereza goes to our Norton Shores office. So you can have a phone appointment with me, or if you want to meet with someone in person, just contact our office and they will schedule a trust review for you, whichever office you want to go to. The other thing, go ahead, Chris.
No, we have more questions, so.
Okay, go ahead.
Another question we have is, what was the 4-year look back that was discussed before? I think they're talking about the 5-year look back for Medicaid planning.
So there's a 5-year look back. So if someone needs skilled care, the state will look back 5 years before they decide that you're entitled from a financial standpoint to receive benefits. And if you set up a protection trust and you put the assets in there for at least 5 years, those assets become non-countable. So that's where you can protect those assets and not be forced to spend those assets down, but they have to be in that protection trust for the 5 years.
So if you have your items titled, funded into the protection trust after 5 years, they are off the table for Medicaid planning.
Correct.
Okay. Our current cottage is already protected in the trust, but what if they decide to dismantle it and build a new cottage on the same property? Will the new place automatically be protected?
If you keep all the assets within that trust, I recommend a phone appointment to get more details on that. But if you keep the assets in the protection trust, it is protected. If you start adding more assets, you spend more money. That could, for example, that's a substantial, let's say you tear down the cottage and build a brand new one, and you add another $200,000, $300,000 for the new cottage. That new money could start a 5-year clock for that asset, for that portion. But let's talk to see if you have other assets in the protection trust already and you're going to spend it from there. But when you make a substantial improvement, such as tearing down a cottage and building a brand new one, that large asset could start a 5-year clock. So we need to talk about what we can do if we can avoid that situation. But if it's minor fix-ups, you don't worry about it. But when you're making a major change, like tearing down the cottage and spending substantial sums of money, that's going to be a different answer.
Okay. Should autos be named in a trust?
Generally, no. For the most part, if they're just something in an ordinary vehicle, $10,000, $20,000, I'm going to say no. It's very easy to transfer an automobile to another relative at death. And if you put your automobile into a trust, and if the vehicle is involved in a motor vehicle accident, they're going to sue the owner of that motor vehicle. So if you start putting that into your protection trust, that can cause problems there. So I'm going to recommend, as a general rule, we don't. Sometimes people have collector items that are worth $100,000. That may be a different situation. We'll look at that separately. But as a general rule, I'd say no, you don't put vehicles into a trust as a general rule. But if you got specific questions on that, they're unique vehicles, then I would say give us a phone call and see if there's anything unique in your case.
We recently took money out of our protection trust for a piece of real estate. we didn't know we should have a loan. Can we still do a loan since it was within the last 6 months?
Technically, that line of credit is supposed to be in place before you take the money out, but I would recommend get a phone appointment with someone here in the next 7 days and see what we can do um, to protect those assets. But ideal situation, you want the loan in place, that line of credit in place before you take the money out.
How is a protection trust different from an estate trust?
So protection trust, we do two different types of trust. The pantry trust, I think is what they're referring to. That's where checking accounts go. And then we do another trust called a protection trust. The protection trust has two benefits to it. Number one, once you fund that trust and there's no claims made against you at that point, you have asset protection from lawsuits. So it's immediate protection once that trust gets funded in the protection trust. The second benefit is after 5 years, assets in that protection trust become non-countable if you need skilled care. The state can't force you to spend that money down. So it becomes protected or off the table if you do ever need skilled care. I see two questions. I don't know, Chris, you can see these, but I can see a couple questions over here.
Okay.
One person prefers a face-to-face meeting in Norton Shore's office. So we can
Yes,
have,
not a
yeah,
problem.
okay, so we can have someone, I'll make a note and have someone give them a call and schedule that appointment.
So after this webinar is over, for anyone who attended, one of our client service schedulers will be calling you either today or tomorrow to see if you would like to schedule a trust review. So is your company still using Ellis Capital?
They're on the old documents. Currently on the new documents we draft, we use West Michigan Community Bank. So West Michigan Community Bank has a trust department, and those are we've been using them for a couple of years now, I would say.
Is there any, do they need to change their documents if they say Ellis Capital?
I would recommend they come in and we look at that and see if we should make a change. It's a case-by-case basis. But that certainly would be wise to have that reviewed at this point. Especially if they haven't been in for the last 3 years, they definitely need, and we haven't used Ellis, I think, for 3 years. So it kind of suggests to me that the documents have not been reviewed recently. So that would be a good time to come in and review their documents.
Okay, this is a good one. What happens when we turn the age, when we have to take out from retirement funds? Does that start the clock over, or is that protected? But I
Okay.
thought the retirement funds, IRAs, 401ks could not be in a trust since they were individually owned.
Correct. So tax benefit, tax advantage accounts, IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, you're getting tax benefits for those. So those have to be held in your names. They're not inside of a trust. So there's no 5-year clock that we start for those assets.
Okay.
So taking those assets out for an RMD is not going to affect your 5-year clock because there's no 5-year clock to start. And there's ways later on, if you need skilled care, we can protect those assets. We don't recommend you cash them out, put them into the trust. I've had that questions periodically. I want to put them in protection trust. Well, the only way to do that is you pay all the taxes on it, and then you can put it in your protection trust and start a 5-year clock. And as a general rule, we don't recommend that. There's other ways we protect those assets in the future. Things that would go in the protection trust right away would be real estate, could be other life insurance policies, depends on your other assets. Some of those could go in there as well. But retirement accounts that are IRAs and 401ks, those are tax advantage accounts. Those are not inside of a trust.
So when you have an account, in this question is a bank account, goes up, the assets go up during the 5 years. Does a 5-year look back affect the status So,
Yep, I think I understand their question. So the question assumes that you put this account into a protection trust because there's no 5-year look back for the pantry trust. So if you put this account inside the protection trust, that starts a 5-year clock for those assets. Now, the fact that it appreciated in value because it had more interest, if it's a CD or some other increase in value, that money is still protected. On the other hand, if you start adding more money to that account, that's going to start a new 5-year clock. So every time you add new funds to that account, there's going to be a new 5-year clock for that. And I'm going to recommend as a general rule, some people, for example, they want to start adding more money to their protection trust. They're not spending all their income. I'm going to recommend maybe once every 6 months or once a year, add a new account and make it a new account number. So if you need skilled care, you can identify which proceeds have been in there for 5 years. And if it's been in there for 2 years, we're going to deal with it differently versus assets that have been in it for 5 years. It becomes more difficult if you say, I'm going to deposit $200 into this savings account that's in the protection trust. I'm going to do that every year. And you do that for 10 years straight. Well, the last 5 years, it's going to be not make the 5-year clock. And now you've got an account for that. So that's why I think to keep things simple, if you just accumulate the funds and add it maybe once every 6 months or once a year, start a 5-year clock and start it with a new account number, it just makes the accounting easier for you later on.
what is a line of credit with a protection trust?
Okay. The line of credit means if I have cash in my protection trust and I want to take it out, I want to buy something that's not going to be used for a protection trust asset. Let's say you want to buy a car and the car is not going to go in the protection trust. You want to take a trip. So you take money out of your protection trust, spend the money on the trip, fill out that line of credit. And then if I need skilled care later on, I've got a line of credit. I can pay back some of that money if I got money from other sources, that revocable trust, and it would keep the 5-year clock going if you pay that back. If you don't have money to pay it back, well, that's money that's just not protected, but at least have that line of credit in place so you can move money out of the protection trust and then always have the option in the future, if you want to pay it back. It's a line of credit between you as the trustee of your revocable trust and you as trustee of your protection trust. It has nothing to do with the bank. There's no interest charged. It's just moving money around, and it gives you the option to take money out of the protection trust. But a good question to come up with it for a trust review and talk about your situation specifically, how you want to use that.
So is that something that paperwork needs to be done? So
Right.
that would, during a trust review, someone would be interested in doing that, or if they know in the future that they're running low on their funds in their revocable living trust, their bank accounts or what have you, and they want to get it, they should call and set up an appointment.
Right. They should have a trust review before they decide they're going to take money out. If you have a trust in the last couple of years, you would have, and you have a protection trust, the line of credit is included in that. If your trust is more than a few years old, I forgot exactly when, maybe 3 years ago, but if your trust is 5 years old, you most likely don't have the line of credit unless you went through a trust review and we added at that point in time. So if you ever plan to take money out of that protection trust, I recommend to have that put in place in advance. And it's a question we start looking at the trust review to see if you have assets in there. Some people have, the only thing they have in there is their house in that protection trust. And they may not need the line of credit right then. But if you ever sell the house or you decide you're going to take the house out of that protection trust, you want that line of credit in place. So it's something that's covered at a trust review. And I encourage, if you have got a protection trust, to have that in place.
When speaking of adding accounts, does a new car loan need to be added?
No, the car loan you have, it's a loan that you have, an agreement between you and the company that loans you the money, but that loan is not going into the trust. It's just a liability you have personally, nothing to do with your trust documents.
I'm not exactly sure, maybe further explanation on this question. What type of fund should real estate sales go into? Do you think she
Oh,
means,
yeah. So I think I know the answer. I think I know what they're getting at. So if you
okay,
sell real estate, number one, and if it's been in the protection trust, ideally you want to put the money back into the protection trust. So part of the question is what type of a trust should it go in? If you have a protection trust, the real estate probably started in the protection trust. You want to put the proceeds in there. When you go to a closing, the trust is going to get a check. They'll have a check payable to you as trustees of your protection trust. So you're going to need an account opening your protection trust to hold that money. And then the other part of the question is what type of an account? Should it be a checking account? Should it be a CD? That's a question, depends on what you want to do with the funds, and maybe your financial advisor would give you some advice. If your intent is, I'm going to buy new real estate and I'm just going to have it in there on a temporary basis. So I sold one house, I got a check payable to the protection trust. Then you want a checking account in the protection trust because you're going to write a check to buy this new real estate someday. On the other hand, you say, no, I'm downsizing. Um, I've got extra property and I'm just going to invest this money. Then you want an account in the protection trust, and you can talk to your financial advisor how you want to invest that money. So it kind of depends your purpose of what you want to use that money for.
okay. Let's see.
The other question I see that was up is that someone asked, what about the forms to fill out in advance? So once you get an appointment scheduled for a trust review, they can send you forms. They open up a portal. So you can download forms, save it to your desktop, fill out the forms and upload those back. If you're not computer savvy and you want them mailed to you, they can also email them to me. You can print them off, or you can say, no, just mail them to me by US mail, print them off. And then if you can send those back, that's very helpful. But prior to the trust review, you can get those documents sent to you either by portal, by email, or by US mail.
I have another question. In the past, I could do an asset review using a form and it would be included in the trust with the changes. Do you think that's a funding question?
Yeah, it's probably, so at the trust review, if you fill out the financial packet, a lot of times we have an asset detail report, especially if the trust has been funded in the last 5 years. You probably have a copy in your binder at that point, and we can review that to find out whether or not that's still current or not.
Let's see, I think I've gotten through the questions. There's a couple questions people ask, but I think they're probably better
Better
answered.
one,
Oh, yeah, they're more
one-on-one.
specific.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. I think that's it.
Okay. All right. Go back over here. So just a reminder that you'll be getting a phone call from our client services. They'll offer you an option to come in for a trust review by phone or by in-person meeting, whatever you want to do. Meetings, no cost, and we'll quote you a fee if there's anything that we recommend for changes. And at this point, we've got a little poll. If you can stick around for a couple minutes, there's about 4 questions. We're going to start this poll. So it gives us a little feedback to see if this was helpful for you today. So let me start that. All right. So I've started that poll, and there are, I think, 4 questions. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes while you answer that poll, but appreciate all your time and your good questions. It's, I think, hopefully helpful for everybody. And expect a phone call here within the next day or two. and you've got choices of which office to go to or a phone appointment. And then let them know that how you want your 2 documents sent to you, the personal information form and the financial information packet too, because those can be sent to you by US mail, by email, or by the portal. Depends on whatever is easier for you.